Hello, and welcome to Navigating Disability, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and successes of living with a disability. Today, we're joined by Dr. Richard Fejo, a Larrakia man dedicated to improving education and health outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. With his extensive experience, Richard has been a powerful voice for change, working towards greater inclusion and accessibility for people with disabilities. Tune in for an inspiring conversation with Richard. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. As a First Nations person, you're probably one of the best people to give us insight into your community and what they need and the challenges they're facing. Tell me a little bit about your story, Richard.
Okay, so I'm actually born with withered right arm, and that's actually my thumb there. So um, I think to start the ball rolling, people need to be a little bit aware of the First Nations history in Australia, some of the history that we've gone through. So my story actually starts with my mum, who was stolen generation. She was taken from Tennant Creek and she was put on Croker Island. And it took her about 40 years to go back to her people and reconnect and find her family again. So by that time, I was 8 years old. But when I was actually born with one arm, the doctors actually wanted to take me away from my family and place me in a different family. And because my mum had been stolen generation and removed from her family, she actually wouldn't let me out of her sight. And so I was privileged to be able to stay in my family. I'm the last of seven, but these type of historical impacts we still feel this trauma today. And being not only a First Nations person, but an Aboriginal person, but also a person with a disability. I grew up in an environment where I felt like, to be honest, it was a double whammy for me. So a lot of people with disabilities that are listening, and I grew up where I was bullied in school. A lot of people with disabilities have experienced that type of trauma. I was alienated, isolated, depressed, because um, the words and the language that people would use to describe people with disabilities, we don't use those words today, but people would call me these names, um, and they would call many people with disabilities similar names. However, what added to my burden was being First Nations, and so I also experienced the racism, and that's why I said I felt like double whammy. I was actually a very intelligent child, but I had a teacher who would actually continuously put me down, and I ended up being very enclosed as a student. And
Can I just
it took a
ask
long
you,
time.
sorry,
Sorry.
Richard, can I just ask you, did this bullying and discrimination start at school? Was your childhood at home, did you face the same issues, or did it really ramp up when you got to school?
Well, I'm the last of seven, so I was lucky to have, be the baby in the family. But my older sisters would always say, and I should also mention, someone who probably saved me was my nephew, who's actually 6 weeks younger than me. And so wherever I went, he went. And so that meant it actually started in kindergarten, where when I first went to kindergarten, my older sisters would actually say, whenever we'd go to pick up Richie and James, Richie will be in one corner and James will be in the other corner because the kids would pick on me and then he would jump in and defend me. And then we'd start fighting all the kids and we'd be the ones
And then you
put in
get in
the corner.
trouble.
Yeah. And so that started from preschool. It's continued in primary school. I remember a kid just wanted to fight me. And I don't even remember why. But those old demountables with the stairs and they had those kind of rocks on the bottom. I was on the top step and he shoved me down there and I had scraped all my face and on my chest because I landed pretty much on the gravel, you know. and I took a swing at him, and I got expelled. You know, and it didn't matter what happened, so I had to go to a different school. And I said, I never started this fight. I never wanted to fight, but you know, here was this guy who was a bully, and he was a white blonde guy. You know,
Did he
and
get expelled?
no, he stayed at that school. And he continued as a bully. But I did meet him years later, and we made up. We talked it through, and we said, look, we're talking about primary school days. We don't need to walk around and watch each other's backs and stuff like that. But when I actually went onto the new school, I got bullied there. I was walking home from school, and I think I was in grade 4 then, and a kid wanted to fight me on the oval, and again, he was just someone out to make a name for himself, and I said, no, I don't want to fight. And then he started fighting me, and I just defended myself. I didn't know how to fight, and I beat him in the fight. And then his older brother, who was in grade 7, jumped in and beat the crap out of me, basically. And so, Mum actually put me into karate school. And you're gonna like this because that was the same time Karate Kid came out. So I was actually in the newspaper as Darwin's own Karate Kid on the front page. And even though I was a white belt, I kept training until I got to blue belt. And that was several years of training karate and discipline. And it taught me balance. And my father always used to say I was very unbalanced as a child and clumsy, probably because I had a big right arm, as you can see, and a
Offside.
very small, yeah. And
Yeah.
so I used to walk around like that all the time. But when I actually started playing sport, and especially when I took up karate, it taught me balance. And when I had balance, I excelled in sport, and I actually represented the Northern Territory in rugby union 4 times, and I represented Australia at schoolboy level and played against the All Blacks at schoolboy level. All Blacks was one international, and I was supposed to play against England as well, but I didn't end up playing against England because they cancelled their flights.
And in
Mm.
terms of your martial arts, karate, how were you treated any differently then because you had one arm or because you were black, Aboriginal?
No, I think at the karate school there were people from different multicultural races. There were, Filipinos, there were Indians, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, and we actually became a brother and sisterhood. We mostly enjoyed the club, and particularly when we went to tournaments because um, I'm sorry to say this, but it's actually like watching a recent edition of The Karate Kid where we became a family, and we took each other's backs. It didn't matter where we were.
Yeah.
But it also came across in our community. So we made friends, and my closest friends was the fat Italian kid who everyone used to bully as well. And so there was the other Aboriginal kid with big afro fuzzy hair that, in primary school, everyone used to beat him up. But we actually learned something really powerful. We learned that the bullies, when 3 of us were together, the bullies couldn't pick on us because 3 of us would fight and would stand toe to toe. And that's what made us best friends for life. And we're still best friends today.
That's so lovely to hear. All of you together are stronger than
Mm,
one of you on your own.
yeah.
And after school, where did you go and what did you do?
Well, I really got dedicated into sports. So, I played rugby union one season. I played Aussie rules the next season. I actually was the under 18s Darwin Buffaloes football captain, and we won the grand final. So I have the flag at home. And I also played rugby league for a local team. So I just became all about sports. But because of the discipline that comes with sports, and the discipline you have to have around healthy eating, fitness, I actually grew a reputation. People would see me running right around Darwin all the time, and people would toot horns at me. They just had the federal elections coming up, and there was a politician standing on the side of the road, and I went and said hello to him, and all these cars were beeping their horns, and he's waving. I said, "They're actually beeping at me, bro."
And is that what piqued your interest in government politics?
Um, I think I've always been passionate about two things, and that's Aboriginal people and our rights and protecting that, and also people with disability and our rights and protecting that. And I've always said that, so coming into this space where I managed to pass year 12 and I went on to university. I started doing a Bachelor of Social Science and I went on to do a double degree in business. And so I was doing law and business and I started working for the Aboriginal Legal Service. So I got to a second year, but when I started working in the Aboriginal sector, Aboriginal Legal Services, I was going remote communities, and I would go on to spend 30 years working across 40 remote communities. And this is where I got um, my reputation from. I call the Northern Territory my backyard. I can travel right through, and people who I don't know who I am. And on top of that, it gave me that leadership quality. So when Larrakia Nation, which is the shirt that I'm wearing here, Larrakia Nation, the two crocodiles and the eight spears representing the clan groups,
Yeah.
when they needed me, my sisters said, you need to come and help out. Darwin's having some antisocial behaviour problems. So I went in there and I turned 50 staff into 130 staff and went from administration and left $3 million in their bank account. And that was over a 4-year period. So the Chief Minister then asked me if I would become the chair of the Darwin Waterfront Corporation. And I took that up for 4 years. And I stood down late last year, because I was protesting against the NT government locking up 10-year-old children. And, they would argue, oh, it's not racism because it applies to everyone. I said, that's not the point. No 10-year-old child belongs in a cell. It's traumatizing. It doesn't matter what race you are, because you're actually giving them psychosocial experiences that are going to impact on them for the rest of their lives. So this is why I voluntarily stood down from that job. But then I also became on the board of NDIS,
Yeah.
NDIA, and that is the highest privilege. I'm being the first Aboriginal person with a disability to sit on that board. I won't lie, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I wondered if I was up to the challenge so many times. But I also think of our first leaders as Aboriginal people or people with disabilities, the people that have actually gone into spaces that never previously existed. And so sometimes I explain my experience as saying, it's like being blindfolded and walking off a cliff because you don't know anything what's around you. So the first leaders that stood up and stood for disability rights, or the first people that stood up for First Nations people rights, they did that without the protective platforms surrounding them because they were the first of their kinds, the first people who spoke up about disabilities, never been done before. So they really went into the unknown. And this is what I keep close to my heart. I think of them as our first leaders. And if it wasn't for them speaking up, then we wouldn't be where we are today. And we would have a platform to continue the narrative and be the voice of more people, people with disabilities or First Nations people. And that's what fuels my fire.
And it's amazing how many people I reach out to interview on these podcasts. And a number of them have come back to me and said, why me? And my answer to that is you are such a unique person with unique experiences. No one else has had the life that you've had. And if we can
Yeah.
help one person out of this conversation today, then I've done what I set out to achieve. One thing I really wanted to ask you about, and it's something that I am ignorant of, so I am looking to you for guidance.
Sure.
What is the disability like in the First Nation group? Like, and what
Yep.
negatives do they suffer compared to, say, the other communities out there? Is there a difference?
Okay, so I've been to the independent advisory group meeting, and I'm just giving you a comparison. So, on one hand, you've got all non-Aboriginal people, and with them, they have had better education than us, probably better experiences than us, and a better knowledge of navigating the system, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So, understanding how processes work are really important when you go, if you apply for disability services, understanding the process from day one until you've actually got the service that you require. For the Aboriginal people, the difference is they've, I think, I felt that they, and this is my opinion only, I felt that they have fought the same battles that I have, but feeling a little more less trusting of the system because in so many ways of the past, our history has let us down before, and it's still doing the same today. And so, what was really impressive about working with the First Nations group is that we all confided in each other and we recognize that we have additional burdens as First Nations people. Like I hear this on the independent advisory group. We have, and I'm sorry, this is representing white people. I'm sorry, and black people, but I'm just trying to give a good explanation. I've heard of people that taxis don't stop for them.
Yeah.
I've heard the same over here, you know. So we do have the same things going on, you know.
I'm hearing from you that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm hearing that there's a lot of mistrust or distrust from the people to the communities that are set up or the organizations that are set up to help them. And I absolutely understand that because from my perspective and my company, which is support coordination, there
Yep.
is so much distrust with the disabled people as well, and the
Mm,
NDIA and the
mm,
NDIS and what's been occurring. It
mm.
seems like, as you said, that's almost a double whammy for disabled First Nations people.
Yeah. But the beauty of that is that we recognize that and we acknowledge that. And it's people with disabilities coming together and acknowledging their challenges and their journeys and their successes. Because one of the things I always say is when we talk about our disadvantage, we've also got to talk about our successes. There has to be balance in everything we do. And it's the same with, you know, on the other hand, to take the pun, but
At least you can laugh about it.
I'm a comedian. I'm a part-time comedian. So, but the thing is, we sit down with each other and we talk about that and we build that trust around each other and we confide in each other and it propels us forward. And we do the same in this situation because I give you this example, life expectancy. There's a good example of the difference between non-Aboriginal and Aboriginal imprisonment rates, um, you know, hospitalization, you know, wealth, sickness, all these things. You have to understand that there is a separation, and when you add disabilities on top of that, we both carry a lot of weight, and we have to identify that, and we have to recognize that and acknowledge that. But one of the good things about it is people with disabilities, whether Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, still have disabilities, and that's a common thread, and it brings us together. And I've seen it, and it's beautiful. I feel so blessed to be able to witness that. It's like people don't see color; they see disabilities for people with disabilities because we share those challenges. If that makes sense.
And we see that all the time. What when's a time in your life where you've had to be really resilient? What changed that made you get through that situation?
Um, all right. I don't usually tell this story, but I've been homeless. I've been in the streets. I suffered from depression. I was driven to attempt suicide. I've been hospitalized and in a mental ward, and that was my midlife crisis. I lost my wife and my children and my property and my cars, and I hit rock bottom. I was not on my own country. I was somewhere down south, and I won't say where. I'll de-identify, but for 4 days I was parked on the side of the road in my own car. I only had my clothes in the back seat with me when I slept at night, and it was freezing cold. And I tried to go to get emergency services. They closed at 4:21. I got there at 4 o'clock. They couldn't do anything for me. They told me if I go to a school, there's a soup kitchen van that drives around there, and that's all I ate for 4 days until I could actually get back, because it was like a long weekend or something like that. And as soon as like I had no money, I didn't even have fuel, you know. And so I asked the soup van if I could borrow $5 so I could drive back to the city, put that in my fuel, and then they put me in a home with people, with three men that were also suffering from depression. And the guy that I was actually roomed with also, he tried to commit suicide the next morning. I found him face down on his belly, in his own vomit, and I resuscitated him. And then I told the other two, who were like adjoining rooms next door, and we got him on an ambulance and took him off to the hospital. And mentally, that broke me. Emotionally, that broke me. Um, when I went to the hospital, I went on antidepressants for about 18 months because I had tried to commit suicide. Um, my family immediately flew me home. I was too embarrassed to come out of my room. I didn't want to see anyone, and not even my own family. I was so shamed. But um, I tell this story quite often, and not just to Aboriginal people, but to anyone who needs to hear it, because our survival stories become other people's survival stories. And to go to a point where I am today, um, I aim to inspire, you know, and, if there's anyone out there that does feel suicidal, I would say to them, reach out for help. I actually ran the men's helpline, and I'm here today thanks to them. And they gave me some good, solid advice, and I was able to do it anonymously. So I didn't have to give up my name or, my location, or I was in tears telling them of my situation, and it broke me. And I feel today that, I'm sorry to say this, but you can't break it's already broken. So I'll never go back to that place of darkness. Um, and I hope I never do, and I hope that never happens for anyone else. But one of the things I've learned is once you hit rock bottom, all you can do is rise. And that's when I went to university again.
Looking back at that time, which obviously was very distressing, what what would you like to have been available to you? What do you think you would have helped you at that time?
Uh, I reckon just, I was very lucky that the service that I spoke to helped me just get over the line. And that's all you can ask for. Because when you're in that mindset of you don't know if you're going to make it through to tomorrow, when you're that depressed and you're thinking about plans, and you get someone to talk you through it. And I was happy with that service, but of course, I would want uh, a better place where I felt more safe, where I felt more resourced, and this is the battle that we're fighting today. And I feel like a soldier and a veteran for surviving this, because this is a battle people with disabilities face often. And I don't know how many people talk about this, and I'm sorry if I'm causing distress. I've learnt about trauma, and I've learnt about vicarious trauma, and I don't wish that on anyone, but I hope to inspire people instead to say, um, there's, tomorrow the sun will come up, and tomorrow, you know, you can do something. You can be someone. Someone loves you somewhere. Someone cares, and you're never isolated or alone. But we still are working on getting these resources out there. And this is where my passion comes from, that lived experience, and I've even had situations where, you know, disabilities, like I said, one of the stories, um, I'm going to say this. I'm going to tell you the worst story, and this may cause trauma and distress, so I apologize up front.
Can I
Uh,
just say, Richard, what I will do is I will put a trigger warning in this on our social media when we do this. In a
yeah,
perfect world, we wouldn't ever want to be having this conversation, but it isn't a
yeah.
perfect world. And if we can help anyone by talking about it and them not feeling alone, then
Mm,
please, open up and be as raw and as honest as you want.
mm. And I think you've actually said my conclusion.
Oh,
Because of
sorry.
what we want. No, 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 that's good. You actually just made me think of it. Hearing that out loud is basically what my message is to people, to talk to people. Don't feel isolated. If you want to tell your story, connect to someone who can tell your story. So my story goes like this, that when I was living down south in a different place, I actually went to a corner store to buy a loaf of bread, and I was standing in line, and there was a little girl who looked like she was about 4 years old or something with her mother. She was in line in front of me, and the lady behind the counter was serving them and didn't think anything of it. And I was just standing there waiting to get a loaf of bread. And this little girl turns around and says, "Look, mummy, that man's got one arm." And I'm sure people with disabilities understand because we would have experienced that so many times, being different. And for children, we don't mind that. We kind of are used to that, I was used to that. But what hurt me was the mother turned around and said, "That's what happens when you're bad." And I was, my heart sank. And then she grabbed the child and stormed out the front. And I know a lot of us have stories like this. The lady behind the counter was almost in tears. She was absolutely horrified. And she said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I just didn't had no clue that was coming." I said, "Lady, you haven't done anything wrong, but I actually do feel sorry for that little girl because this is an environment she's growing up in, which is going to make her think differently of people with disabilities
How
and
old were
blame."
you, Richard, at the time?
I reckon I would have been about 20, 25. But you know, it shocks you to the core to get that a react type of reaction from an adult, and I'm sure it would anybody out there listening. And to those of you who have had that type of experience, my heart goes out to you because I know I've had that lived experience. I've felt that pain, and that pain doesn't go away. It just actually adds to the more pain that we live in life. But I'm not here to talk about the bad things. I'm here to talk about the good things, and the good things is where we come to.
If you were in that situation again, would you handle it differently?
Absolutely. I wasn't prepared for that.
No.
I think that's why I was just so shocked. My jaw hit the floor. Literally, I was just like, I was like, how can actually someone say that to a little girl, to our own child? Um, you know, was it race? I don't think so. It was actually looking at my arm, you know, and saying like I'm a thief and I had my arm cut off or something, you
And
know.
there's absolutely no common sense to that comment at all,
Yeah,
but
but
it's now
we still,
ingrained in her head.
yeah, yeah, and like I said, it's a pain that doesn't leave me either that I live with, and also I share these stories in the hope that people who have these experiences know that you're not alone, that there are other people out there, and these are why we need to talk to each other. This is why we need to seek support. This is why we need to actually talk to people with those lived experiences that understand the trauma that we encounter daily, whether it's First Nations people or whether it's people with disabilities or whether it's both. Because once we actually can do that, we can start to feel supported. We need to seek the help that we need, and this happened back in maybe the late 90s. That wasn't that long ago. I'm hiding my age here, by the way. But the thing is, it's still out there today, and there are very sad, uneducated people who make very poor decisions when they open their mouths, and it can be very hurtful.
What would you like to say to people out there? Because sometimes, it is embarrassment that the children have said, "Oh, Mum, look at his arm," and they don't
Mm,
know how to handle that discussion. What
mm.
would you like to see happen in that situation?
So I think we have to start education early at primary school level, if not kindergarten level. I think education is key to everything and communication. And so how we do that is we actually have to start early. So in some locations, I think about it like this. Here's a good story for you. So I've trained doctors for 15 years because of my remote experiences. So I say to the doctors, okay, imagine you get in your car, you start your car, and the volume on your engine is turned down. It's zero. You can't hear anything. If you turn it up to 10, it becomes deafening. And so this is a dial that goes 0, 3, 7, 10. And so Aboriginal people are like that. And sometimes people from non-English speaking backgrounds or cultural backgrounds have challenged to speak and communicate in English. So people who say 1 to 3 speak pretty good English like myself. People 3 to 7 might speak Aboriginal English or Creole. And then 7 to 10 is people who only speak pure language. And this is our experience when we actually come across services as well, and understanding entering into disability service processes. Not having that experience of actually being there before, you don't know what to expect. And so I say to people, think reflectively of what's it like if you're the person, if you're the applicant, and put yourselves in their shoes and their experience. So you can open your mind to different ways of thinking and reflective thinking. And that's going to make you a better service provider. That's going to attract more people to your service, and it's going to make better for throughout our community. Because people will go to your service and they'll say, I like that doctor there. He's a good doctor. I like this service provider here. They're really great. Or they're going to do the opposite.
Yep.
It's up to you.
And it's word of mouth too, because they're then going to go away and
Exactly.
say, that doctor was amazing. Go and see him. He really understood my trauma, my disability,
Mm.
my whatever. So
Yeah.
100% correct.
Yeah, and I've lived that life, 15 years training GPs, and either they say that you're really good or you're really bad, and the really bad ones don't stay on.
What are your hopes, Richard, for the future?
I actually just want people to live their lives to the fullest. And I've learnt that for myself. And that's one of the things that frees me from my chains. I've felt for a long time that I've been weighed down as a person with a disabilities. And sure, I accept I'm never going to play the guitar. You know, I know there's things we can't do, but I also drive a 5-speed manual and tie up my own shoelace. Recently, I've just applied to join the army and they're interested. So I might be an Aboriginal person who's 54, I'm not going to hide their age, with a disability who can join the army because they're going to look through how I can join the army, what I can do, disability services, First Nations, community engagement.
It doesn't mean that you have to be out fighting the fight in the field with guns. There's
Hmm.
absolutely can be a role for
I
you.
can work in recruitment.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's so many roles out there. I don't know if you've seen our logo, but originally it was navigating disability.
Yep.
And
Behind
after
you.
talking to so many people, we've realized that there's so much ability out there if
Mm.
people can look past the disability.
Yeah.
And they say that, employing disabled people, they're loyal, they're hardworking, they don't leave.
Mm.
There really is a market out there that employers have to start to understand,
Yeah. And
because
we
there's
have to
so
set a
much.
new normal. We have to say people with disabilities are welcome to our employment services. You know, we have to make that the narrative. You know, and for a long time, I've said this when I go to talk with kids at schools. I say the only person stopping you from doing what you're doing is you. If you apply yourself, you can do it. And even if you can't, you're not going to win every fight. You're not going to win over every job. But if you're living your life to the fullest, then that's the life worth living.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I also love, you say live life to the fullest, and I 100% agree with you. But it's also about being kind. Put yourself
It
in
is.
other people's shoes. And,
It
would
is.
you like to be called those names? Would you like to be treated as a, lesser person because of your disability, your color, your race,
Yep. Yep.
whatever? So acceptance, I think, is really big in this
Yeah.
area.
And I believe holistically, we can be a better, smarter Australia if we can do that. If we can accept people the way they are through disability or race, you know, turn that into ability, you know, turn that negative talk into positive talk. And this is where I become a champion by going into those spaces that we've never been to before. And I'm trying to set an example for people with disabilities. I've never been there before. I told you I had imposter syndrome, but I'm doing it. And now that I've found where I am, I'm proving it and I'm delivering. And I want to be an inspiration for people to look at and say, hey, if you can do it, I can do it. And I'm talking to all the people with disabilities and I'm talking to our First Nations listeners, whether you've got disabilities or not. You know, you have to become an inspiration on yourself. You have to put in the hard yards. And when you do that, you know, you will become a person that people will look up to, not for your disability, but for your ability. And you will change your life, you know, it will change how people look at you and perceive you, you know. I'd love to imagine that, you know, people with disabilities being in jobs for 20 years and buying their own houses and cars and stuff like that, you know, and living as normal life as they can, or again, life to the fullest of their ability.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in everybody has potential. It might
Mm,
be here, it might be here, but
that's right.
everyone has a right to reach that potential,
That's right.
if they
And
want
there are
to.
degrees of, you know,
Yep,
achievement,
yep,
but every individual has at least the opportunity to try,
yep.
you know. It's like they say, you know, you might not people. I think I've seen memes and stuff like that, you know, these inspirational memes, and people say things like, you know, I can accept failure, but I can't accept not trying, you know.
And with the imposter syndrome, half the time, the biggest problem is the first step. And
It
once
is.
you take that first step, there's no looking back. I sat on these podcasts for 3 months and I
Yeah.
just didn't do it, didn't do it, didn't do it, didn't do it. And then one day I thought, this is ridiculous, Kate. Get on and do an interview. And I've never looked back. But for three
Yeah.
months, I sat there.
You'll like this because I've actually at Flinders University where I also work in, that's my background office. But you know, I've actually interviewed people like Midnight Oil,
Yep.
just to inspire our students here. Um, I can't think of his name, but Goanna, the lead singer,
Yeah, yeah.
and also Midnight. No, the guy who sings Midnight Blue. Um, Midnight Blue.
I know the song.
Ivor Davies.
Ivor Davis, Ice House.
Yeah,
Yes.
Ice House. Yes. And so I've been in your seat, and it's the same thing. So imagine a group of podcasters having a workshop and talking to each other, you know. Well, this is what we're doing with the First Nations groups. We're actually saying, well, this is a First Nation group with disabilities. What makes us unique in our own way is that we are people with disabilities who happen to be First Nations. So again, going back to what are our similarities, and how do we find comfort in talking to people in that circle? You know, it's like a bubble. People live in this bubble, and I've had doctors in Melbourne that I've trained, and they say, we live in a bubble, and this is a wealth bubble. We don't know anything outside of it. So how can we understand what's going on with, people in the Northern Territory with poor health? And I said, well, think about this. What's the opposite of your wealth bubble? Is a poverty bubble, And so people in that poverty bubble don't know life that's better than other than being poverty, or being poor. And this could be, some people out there, especially people remote, whether they're Aboriginal or not Aboriginal, people with disabilities, they might live in a community and their bubble is their everyday life around them, but they may not know about NDIS. They may not know about the services that can be applied to them. So therefore, they don't actually see outside their bubble. They don't know a better world than what they exist in. And this is why we need to do more. We need to be the voices of people who can't speak for themselves. We need to be able to communicate what we do, and why we do it, and how we can improve lives, from the people that are not yet on NDIS, First Nations or otherwise,
100%, Richard. I totally agree. And if there's any opportunity for me to step in and help those remote countries, please come to me. I am more than happy to do what I can do. On that note, what an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for being so open and honest and real about your life experience. This is a podcast about inspiration. We don't want people to feel alone. We want people to feel connected. And I've got absolutely no doubt, whether they're people with disability, First Nations people, or anyone else, they will have got something out of today's chat. So thank you very much, Richard.
I hope so. And just one last message for the listeners. The people on the board with the disabilities and the people that are on the board, even without disabilities, we're representing you. We're your voice. So know that we are doing what we can for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.